Well, greetings out there to all you ampaholics in YouTube land. I know you're hungering for a fix here this morning. And recently I was traveling and went to Austin Vintage Guitars in, very fittingly, Austin, Texas, and had the opportunity to look over one of the best collections of vintage amplifiers I've ever seen. And the best part is they're all for sale. So I looked throughout everything they had and picked out what I thought was by far the finest amp that I could possibly afford. And without further ado, here it is. Wow, I know you're speechless just like I was. Well, let's remove the camera from the tripod so we can get an up-close look at this pristine gem. Just a slightly weathered leather handle on a beautiful, highly polished top. Somebody removed the grill bars, probably with their foot, to allow the speaker to communicate more effectively with the audience. On this side, it's probably a cat demonstrated its enthusiasm for the beautiful crackle paint finish. On this side we have the ubiquitous white paint. No vintage amp would be complete without it. But as we all know, the rear of the amp is where the action always is. And here we have some very, very forward-thinking engineering where the amp wood has been allowed to separate so we can get more circulation of air for the powerful output tube. We have the delightful rat's nest motif here on the surface of the amp chassis. 3 tubes of unknown origin, but probably all 3 non-functional, or we can only hope. Here, all the controls an amp needs. We have the combo on-off and volume switch, the fuse, and one of my favorites, the pink zip cord. I know when the person who repaired this amp was looking around for suitable zip cord, they probably passed up black and brown in favor of the delightful pink. In lieu of any manufacturer's name or any clue that might help us determine who made this amp or when, or perhaps to find a schematic, instead they say for service or information refer to 74 JJC 2511C, which of course is as clear as day to anyone who knows anything about amps. I also found this amusing. We can plug in instrument 1 and instrument 2 or microphone. Okay, this one over here is or microphone. Well, and then on the floor, thank heavens, you know, you want a nice schematic for your amp. Who could ask for more than this? Okay, apparently the rats needed something to make their nest with, and that's where they got it. Okay, we're going to look in here at this magnificent 6-inch speaker. Looks like an Alnico or an unwound electrodynamic. We've got the output transformer, though, very craftily attached with one screw here so it can flap to accompany our music, so we have percussion along with our guitar playing. Sadly, I noticed that the speaker cone is intact. It seems to be okay, which is really unfortunate because, let's face it, ragged speaker cones always seem to contribute to the vintage tone that we all seek. And last but not least here, the delightful hold down for the power cord. Of course, no pink zip cord worth its salt would ever be imprisoned beneath a clip like this, and it's been left to flap happily in the breeze. Well, that's about it on the high points here of this beautiful vintage gem. Let's pull out this chassis and blow off all the rat excrement and take a look at the wiring. Okay, the chassis is out. We'll look here at the shelf. You see some wax that's been dripped from an overheated power transformer, always a good sign. Some lovely rodent fur here on either side to provide a dampening so there's no feedback from the speaker to the chassis. And really nice amount of rust on the speaker basket. Okay, let's take a look at the chassis. All right, we already saw this part. Here we see more mounds of rodent fur and urine, of course. Kind of a loose original filter cap and glass tubes. I am going to guess these were originally metal. Okay, let's flip it over. And surprisingly enough, the inside looks like it is unmolested. All the original Sprague capacitors. I don't see any evidence of overheating on the resistors. Big old combo switch here. I'm going to guess this amp probably dates back to the late 40s. So this is some rather primitive electronic gear here. Ungrounding input jacks. Okay, now let's plug it in and see if it works. People often ask me if I have an exhaustive checklist and series of precise measurements that I make before I ever plug in an amp chassis, and the answer is no. I check it for obvious shorts and serious problems, which I don't see other than cosmetic here. So what I do is plug the beautiful pink zip cord into my trusty current limiter, and you turn it on. Okay, let's see what happens. I'm keeping an eye on the current limiter bulb. I'm hearing a very loud 120 cycle hum, which tells me that the electrolytic filter capacitors have bitten the dust. Let's turn it off. So with that very simple procedure, I've determined that the tubes work, the on-off switch works, the power transformer, output transformer, speaker, fuse, everything seems to be in working order here except for the electrolytic capacitors. So let's replace the electrolytics and the power cord. I'm going to use a 3-wire power cord to ground this magnificent chassis, and then we'll see how it sounds. And here, much to my delight, after scraping off a couple inches of mouse droppings, the tube sockets are all labeled, and we see that this is a 6SJ7 pentode preamp circuit, 6V6 output, 5Y3 rectifier tube. Now, after a whole bunch of rubbing and polishing with Meguiar's Gold Class car wax, metal polish, aerosol kerosene, Q-tips, and toothbrushes, we end up with a whole lot more presentable amp. The rust is still there from the rodent urine, but as you can see, all of the original tube marking is still present. A little rust back here, but all in all, considering its age, very presentable chassis now. Okay, Rusty, you've had your treat. Now, are you ready to get to work? Huh? You ready? Guess not. When trying to restore a vintage amp, I usually turn to the internet for information on what it looked like, possible schematics, and things like that to help me do an accurate restoration. And using an internet search based on the mysterious numbers that were found here at the bottom left corner of my chassis, I turned up this entry on the Steel Guitar Forum from Bobby Roundtree of San Angelo, Texas, dated way back in 2008, and he's asking if anybody knows anything about this amplifier. And as you can see, it's identical to the one I have, down to the very last detail, except of course it's in way better shape. It has the grill bars intact, and it has a rear panel over the speaker compartment with 3 horizontal slots. although nobody saw fit to respond to Bobby's inquiry, and that it would have been nice if somebody had chimed in here with a lengthy dissertation on the history of the amplifier with schematics and everything else, but as generally the case, no response at all, which is a real shame. However, from this entry I have gleaned some information, and that is what the missing rear panel looks like, an idea of what a good original amp is supposed to look like, and to give me some basis in my restoration, sort of a goal. I would like to have mine end up being at least this nice, or a little nicer if possible. Okay, a lofty goal indeed. Hey Rusty. Since it seems impossible to determine the manufacturer of this amp, let alone find a schematic for it, I've had to rely on an alternate method. And that is, based on the tube complement of the amp, a 6SJ7, 6V6, and 5Y3, find other better known amps that have existing schematics that use that same tube complement. And that includes the Fender Champion 800 and 600 from 1948 to 53, and the Gibson GA5 Les Paul Jr. Made from 54 to 57. Then I white out the values on the, in this case, Fender schematic, and trace the circuit of the unknown amp and fill in its values, because the circuitry will be very close if not identical. And what I end up with is this, a rather messy but very usable schematic. Let's take a close look at it. After the signal comes in past a 100K input resistor, passes through a huge 0.1 microfarad capacitor to the grid of the 6SJ7. The cathode is both biased with a 1K resistor and bypassed with a 10 microfarad capacitor. The signal then comes out and passes through another huge 0.1 microfarad coupling capacitor to a 0.5 meg ohm volume control, and then onto the grid of the 6V6. The 6V6 is biased with a 390 ohm resistor and bypassed with a 10 microfarad capacitor, just like the 6SJ7. Other areas of interest down here would be in the power supply. We have two 20 microfarad filter caps separated by a 500 ohm 10 watt internodal resistor. The third filter cap is 16 microfarads. All are at 450 volts. The second internodal resistor is a 25K. Also, there is a very unusual power resistor inserted in the line right here. I believe that originally this amp came with an electrodynamic speaker that probably had around a 400 or 500 ohm field coil. When a permanent magnet speaker was substituted, they put in a power resistor in this line to reduce the current flow as if the field coil were still present. Now this is just a guess, because the 390 ohm resistor used here to compensate for the missing field coil is absolutely identical to the biasing resistor used for the 6V6. Now I find that to be an extraordinary coincidence. It's entirely possible that the factory ran out of electrodynamic speakers and started using permanent magnet speakers, and had to put in this resistor to compensate. Perhaps we'll learn a little more when we take a look inside the amp chassis. The specific areas that I intend to address are, I think these coupling capacitors are ridiculously huge, and I want to substitute 0.02 microfarad caps. The 510K plate resistor for the 6SJ7 seems high. I'm going to try around a 220K to 250K. And I'm going to try it with and without this resistor in place. And also, I think these filter caps are excessive. I'm going to go with a 20, 10, and 10. Hey Rusty, you're not even going to stick around for me to ask you if you're ready to go to work. Since the little output transformer is obviously an add-on part, I wanted to measure its winding ratio. So I used the method explained in my output transformer video and ran 26.1 volts of AC from my variac into the primary side, and on the secondary got exactly 1 volt of output. So that means that the winding ratio is 26.1 to 1. Okay, with a winding ratio of 26.1 to 1, we square it, it's 681.2, and the formula dictates that the secondary impedance times the winding ratio squared is equal to the primary impedance. So with a 4 ohm speaker, we're only applying 2,724 ohms to the plate of the 6V6. That's too low. An 8 ohm speaker would be 5450, which is just about ideal. So this output transformer then is suited for an 8 ohm speaker if you have a single 6V6 output tube. But this little output transformer has one other interesting feature, and that is there are 6 separate lugs on the secondary output side. And to map the winding ratio for each of these connections, I use the same method I just demonstrated with a variac input here to the primary side until I get exactly 1 volt out on the secondary side. And as you can see, if I connect 1 and 2, it's a 40.2 to 1 ratio, which gives me 6,464 ohms to the 6V6 plate when connected to a 4 ohm speaker. And that would be ideal. Anything from around 5,000 to 8,000 ohms will work. This is the one I just measured, and the way the output transformer is currently wired, which is 1 to 3, which gave me the 5534 ohms, but at an 8 with an 8 ohm speaker. And if I connect 1 to 4, I get a 19 to 1 winding ratio, 5776 ohms, and I can use a 16 ohm speaker. So as you can see, by picking my taps here on my secondary output, I can make this output transformer work with either 4, 8, or 16 ohm speakers. As is often the case, this old volume control potentiometer is a real mess. If you hook it up to an analog meter, the needle jumps all over the place. Instead of a nice smooth sweep, it loses continuity, jumps, makes noise, does all sorts of things. So there's no way around it. You have to clean it. This one's sealed, so the only way to clean it really is to pop these 3 clips off and then open it up so that you can get inside to clean the resistance band, and then retest it to see if you've achieved the goal of restoring it to smooth operation. Now that the interior here of the potentiometer is immaculately clean and polished, let's hook it up to an analog meter and see how it sweeps. Now as you see, we'll get a nice smooth sweep through the range from 0 to 500k ohms. Next we take a look at that rusty old 6-inch speaker that came with the amp, and as you can see, it cleaned up real well. It's got a marking here on the side. It's hard to read, but it's 285-651, which would be a Rolla speaker made in the 6th week of 1951. Then you flip it over, you see that the cone is in real nice shape. I put the contact cement around the perimeter just to kind of rejuvenate it. And then look down here, this is kind of interesting. It was sold by Western Electronics Company February 25th, 1952. Now this may have been a replacement speaker in the amp, or else when this company sold the speaker to the manufacturer of the amp, they sent it stamped like this on the gasket. Next, I'm going to hook up the voice coil of the speaker to a DC ohm meter. I find it has about 3.2 ohms of resistance. However, since the signal being applied to the voice coil is alternating current, the voice coil will provide impedance to that signal, which is closer to 4 ohms. So this is a 4 ohm speaker, which means that the output transformer was improperly wired. The 1 to 3 lug connection suits an 8 ohm speaker. Since this is a 4 ohm speaker, I'm going to use lugs 1 and 2. Okay, here's the chassis all ready to go. I mounted the output transformer inside instead of mounted on the speaker, mainly because it doesn't really fit anywhere on the speaker very well, and now I only have to run 2 wires instead of 4. Here's the new 3-wire power cord with the chassis securely grounded. Up here are the new electrolytic filter capacitors. There's a 20 underneath and 2 10s. Here's the original. I don't ever leave anything attached to a worn out electrolytic capacitor. I cut off the leads and I leave it in place for looks. But if you try to wire new components to the leads of an old filter capacitor, you're asking for a whole lot of trouble. And as typical of my type of wiring, I put in a terminal strip here to hold everything instead of having it flap around in here and possibly short out. And here are the new 0.02 microfarad coupling capacitors, replacing these horrendous 0.1 microfarad sprigs. Here are the original cathode bypass caps, and now there are little tiny ones installed down here, 25 at 50 and 25 at 50. And also the grossly out of spec 390 ohm cathode bias resistor has been replaced with a heat dissipating power resistor, 5 watt, that is of the right resistance to yield a plate dissipation value of 11 watts for the 6V6. The volume pot has been thoroughly cleaned and is now just smooth as glass. Okay, Rusty, you've had your jerky treat, licking your chops. You ready? Let's get to work now. You ready? I'll get the tripod and the camera. There he goes. Okay, time for the grand unveiling. And here it is, the finished amplifier. As you can see, the grille bars have been restored. I haven't painted them with that gold crackle yet, but I probably will in the future if I can hunt down some gold paint that's appropriate. I replaced the grille cloth with some very early vintage original grille cloth that I had on hand. I think you'll see that the top looks a little better than it did. The handle is still frayed, but intact. Look over here at this side. Really turned out nice. Let's look at the other side. And here's I believe the cat ear inside. Turned out real nice. Let's take a look in the back. And last but not least, here's the rear view of the cabinet with the cleaned up chassis, the non-pink power cord, and the lower rear panel like we saw in the internet images. I left the screws out so I can open it, show you the nice cleaned up roll of speaker. And the final surprise here is an accurate schematic of the circuit. Hopefully no rats will make a nest out of this one. Okay, we got the screws in place. It's all buttoned up. Let's turn it around and see how it sounds. Okay, we're plugged in and the volume is set at 7. Hey Rusty, are you through resting up? You ready to get back to video production? I mean, your fans haven't seen you in a long time and they're really anxious. Okay, you ready to spring into action? Oh, that's my boy. Yep. Well, in my own totally biased opinion, I'm really pleasantly surprised by the volume and tone that this little amp has. Considering the rather primitive circuit with a single 6J7 pentode preamp stage, I think the volume is rather impressive. And the tone is excellent, especially through a 6-inch, 65-year-old speaker. It sounds more like a 10 or 12-inch speaker to me, actually. The sound is quite full, plenty of bass response, and yet good clarity at the top end. This amp was probably originally intended for use with a lap steel guitar, and I think that explains those giant 0.1 microfarad coupling caps. The pickups on those lap steels were rather unusual. Some of them used big horseshoe magnets. In this case, however, with some modifications, as you can tell, it works just fine with modern guitars and modern humbucker pickups. Hey Rusty. Well, that's about it on this video documenting the restoration of the mystery lap steel guitar. I hope you enjoyed it. I know that some of you are thinking that going to a store like Austin Vintage Guitars, whose merchandise, it's like going to a singles bar that is populated only with supermodels, but yet I came home with Rosie O'Donnell. Okay, so you're thinking, how could this happen? I've always had a soft place in my heart for really neglected and damaged objects like this old amplifier. It's been to hell and only halfway back, and all I could think of is let everybody else have the $4,000 and $5,000 amps, and let me see what I can do to pep up this poor old guy and make him look good and sound good once again. I hope that made sense, and I also hope that you enjoyed the video. Rusty and I now are going to sign out. Thanks for watching and subscribing, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye for now. Hey Rusty, are you excited about being back on YouTube? Huh? If you're excited, pant and stick your tongue out. Yep, there it is.